As I've gotten older, I have wanted to and had a desire to go back into what it felt like as a child. Go back into those feelings of excitement and wonder. And as I think about college football, I think, why can't we do that? Why can't we get back to that stage of wonder and beauty and why we fell in love with the sport in the first place? Um, So, welcome back to College Football Tradition. I'm here doing a solo show for you tonight because I really want to talk about my proposed changes that I think could really benefit college football. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about, it's a lot of it isn't new. A lot of it is, though, and a lot of it has been original thought of things that I've been thinking about for a long time and wondered, why can't it be this way? Why don't we want it to be this way? Um, growing up, I was a huge fan of college football. I grew up in Ohio, grew up going to Youngstown State football games on the FCS level. And if you grew up going to small college football games, so FCS D2 or D3, you understand the sense of community that surrounds an atmosphere like those arenas, like those stadiums. And you get that wonder in FBS football too. You absolutely do. But there's something different about small college football that really just impacted my life growing up. Growing up, I was a huge college football fan. I wasn't much of an NFL football fan, mainly because I grew up a Cleveland Browns fan, and it's just a real struggle. It still is to this day a real struggle to be a Cleveland Browns fan. I'm not sure if there's a tougher NFL fan base to be a fan of. Um, but I grew up a fan of college football and a fan of the NFL playoff structure. I didn't love NFL that much, mostly because my Browns were out of playoff contention by December, regardless of what my father said about the mathematical possibilities of what could happen. Usually the Browns were out of it by December. But I remember looking at the NFL playoff structure, and to me, it was perfect. It was 12 teams. And 12 was one of my favorite numbers, still is one of my favorite numbers. If you have a favorite number, I'd love to know what it is and why. 12 was always one of my favorite numbers because I found it to be clean, concise. It's a multiple of other numbers, three, four, two, six. It's just it's just a really nice, clean number, and it can be used for so many different things, especially when it comes to organization and structure. And someone like me, I like to be very neat. I like to be very organized. I'm very meticulous, even when it comes to the fonts that I'm using on Microsoft Word. I'm just very structured when it comes to that. So when I would look at the NFL playoff structure, I'd notice a couple things. I would notice number one, my Browns are not in the playoffs. Surprise, shocker. But I would notice number two, that you couldn't get last in your division and still make the playoffs. So the playoffs for the NFL consisted of all eight division champs and then four additional wild card teams. So at most, three teams from one division could make the playoffs. And there were plenty of years where the other three teams in the AFC North made the playoffs while the Browns were last and left out. But I loved that format because it punished the team that didn't take care of business in their division. It rewarded all the division champions, regardless of record, and it provided an opportunity for wildcard teams to get in because let's say the division champ was just the best team in the NFL during the regular season. I thought it was great that there were additional teams that had a chance to still make the playoff, which was awesome. So I loved the 12 team structure of the NFL. And I asked myself, why can't college football have this? So, growing up watching college football and being a fan of Ohio State, I would sometimes see Ohio State lose. And of course that was a rarity, and I'm part of a spoiled fan base in that sense. But if Ohio State were to lose, sometimes that was it. There was probably a lot of times, a lot of years, not a lot of opportunity paths to make it back into the BCS national championship race. A couple of years there were, but a couple of years there weren't, and you really kind of had to be perfect in that era, regardless of your schedule, to make the national championship game. And even in years where Ohio State would lose a game or two, my dad would always say, he'd say, we could still make the Rose Bowl and or we could still make the Sugar Bowl or one of those big New Year's bowl games. And to me, it's not that I wasn't interested in the Sugar Bowl or the Rose Bowl or whatever else that Ohio State could accomplish in the postseason. It was more like it seemed like an old way of thinking. And for me, I felt like, that we're pursuing a Big Ten championship. Like, I want to beat Michigan. I want to beat Penn State. I want to beat our rivals. I want to win the Big Ten. All of those things are beauties within the college football season and should not be taken away. You want to beat your rivals. That is one of the staples of the sport that make it so unique. And it's unlike any other sport when it comes to rivalry games. I truly believe that. But then I was always kind of disappointed that, yeah, the Rose Bowl's great and the Sugar Bowl's great, but I would love for there to still have been a chance at a national championship if you were to stumble along the way, or if you were to go perfect and there were just other undefeated teams ahead of you. I mean, there were just so many different avenues to look at it. I thought that a sport of 130 teams should have some type of structure where not just the top two teams from the regular season were the ones playing for the national title. I thought that there should be a better system for that. So when the 4 team playoff came around, I thought it was a good step forward. I thought that it was a system that was going to reward the best conference champions. Every now and then it might reward a really good group of 5 team, and it did in 2021 when Cincinnati made it at 13-0 out of the American Athletic Conference. So I thought the 4 team playoff was a good step forward. And then when they moved to 12, it came at a very weird time for the sport because it came at a time where conferences were realigning in such ways that it almost made sense for us to still have the 4 team playoff with the current conference structures that we have. We now have 4 power leagues, and I feel like we could kind of debate that the 4 team playoff would have made more sense with the conference structure that we're dealing with now, where the 12 team playoff would have made more sense 10 years ago when the 4 team playoff was introduced. So, in my opinion, the 12 team playoff was always something that I advocated for, mainly because I loved 12. I loved the NFL playoff structure. NFL eventually moved to 14, and I understand why. Definitely created more money for the league. It allowed for more competitive games down the stretch because that 1 seed in the AFC or the NFC became so crucial and became something you wanted to play for. So the NFL was smart financially for making that move, making that decision. And when college football moved to 12 teams, I think that we all enjoyed it. Whether you wanted expansion or not, I think we all really enjoyed watching games on home campuses. We really enjoyed the bigger bowl games having a little bit more meaning than just a regular bowl game because the Cotton Bowl in the past, it would have opt-outs. But now, as part of the playoff structure, it was now something that was integral to moving on to the semifinals or moving on to the national championship. So the 12 team playoff was great. And as college football continues to evolve, I'm wondering what are the steps forward? What are the ways that college football can improve so that we could protect rivalries, so that we could protect the regular season, protect conference alignment, not just for football purposes, but for all these other sports. I'm mainly thinking about basketball and volleyball and soccer because those are sports that play a lot of games, especially basketball and baseball as well, and softball. They play a lot of games, and you have to play a lot of conference games. So sports like cross country and track and field, they aren't as affected by conference realignment, but team sports, where there's a lot of games in place like baseball, softball, basketball, volleyball, you're traveling across the country and expending all this energy and all this money when you could be playing teams that are right down the road like you used to be doing. But now, since you still have to play the same amount of conference games as you did back when conferences made more sense regionally, it's just created this jumble that football isn't super affected by it because you only play 12 games and you only play 1 game a week. So football isn't as affected by it, but all these other team sports that play multiple games a week and play two or three times as many contests throughout the year, they're really affected by it. Outside of the fact that we're taking away regional rivalries and and some of the spectacles of the sport and history and tradition that aligns in the sport away, we're also negatively affecting some of those other sports. So I wrote an article and I posted it to our college football account the other day. But the article was about some of the changes that I'd like to see in the sport. So what I really started with was the regular season and why I thought there needed to be some structure to the regular season. And mainly because you see all these different conferences and they're going and they're playing 9 conference games a year when you only have 12 regular season slates. That only leaves room for 3 non-conference games. And if you're like a lot of these teams, you sometimes have non-conference rivals that you want to keep that tradition going. Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Kentucky, Louisville, Iowa State, Iowa. Would love to keep USC, Notre Dame. And if you throw that into the mix, then you really only have 2 games where you are free to schedule on your own. And I don't really like that. And when I look at college football, why did Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA, why did they join the Big Ten? They joined the Big Ten because it would be financially gainful for the TV networks. I'm talking about Fox and I'm talking about CBS, who are in the Big Ten's media rights deal. It was beneficial for the Big Ten to add those schools because you were going to get matchups like Oregon and Penn State, like USC and Michigan, like Washington and Ohio State. You were going to get those big matchups that you wanted. But for every Oregon at Penn State, you were also getting Oregon at Rutgers. You were also getting UCLA versus Wisconsin. These games that, when you look at it, weren't that more appealing to a general audience than UCLA Arizona State was, or Oregon Washington State was. Instead, we were sending the Ducks all the way across the country to New Jersey to play in a conference game. I think that it's only a matter of time, and I'm just speculating here. I'm just making kind of a prediction in a way. How long until the Ohio States and the Alabamas of the world, those big market teams, how long until they start to question why they are subsidizing the Purdue's and the Mississippi States of their respective conferences? How long until Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State look at the rest of the Big Ten and say, why are we funding Northwestern football? Like, the eyes are on us, not Northwestern right now, unless they play us. So why are we subsidizing that with a TV contract? So when I look at conference realignment, it's very important to understand why Texas and Oklahoma joined the SEC. But for every Texas at Georgia, you're also getting Texas versus Vanderbilt. You're also getting Oklahoma versus Mississippi State. And not to say that those can't be big time matchups, because they can be. I mean, see what Indiana did this past year. They became one of the hottest teams in college football, first team to go 16-0 in the modern era. Obviously, we could name off their accomplishments forever, but we start looking at the conference games as a whole, and there's so many good games now, but there's also a lot of games that you're like, why are we playing this? Is this really one that was worth ruining a rivalry for? Was it worth ruining Oregon and Oregon State to go and have Oregon and Rutgers? That's basically what I'm asking. So for me, when I look at college football and I continue to think about my favorite number 12, I think about, wow, I would love it if every conference had the same number of teams. And I'm not trying to NFLize college football. I don't think that's something that we want to do. But one thing that I love the idea of is every conference having the same number of teams. Whether you believe that's 10 or 12 or 14, whatever you think is fine, but at least have your rationale for why you think that. So for me, when I think about conference realignment, I think about all the teams that I want to keep in certain conferences. So for me, I want to keep history and tradition alive. So I look at a conference like the Big Ten, and I want to keep the Big Ten. And if you want to keep the Big Ten, and you want to keep the original real original members of that conference. Then you say, well, I want to keep Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Indiana, Purdue, Illinois, Northwestern, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, the original teams that made up the Big Ten and have been in that league for 100 years. I think it's really important to keep those teams together. And I feel the same way about the SEC when it comes to Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Florida, Georgia. Keeping all of them together in the SEC, I think, is really important as well. Just because the history and tradition and the rivalries and the trophies and the camaraderie that exist amongst those teams. I have no desire to move LSU into a league with Texas Tech and Oklahoma State and Baylor and in a new recreated Southwest Conference. I have no desire to do that. And I've seen people realign conferences and do that with LSU. And that to me just doesn't make sense. And I've seen people do this with Iowa as well, where they put Iowa in with Kansas and Kansas State and Missouri and in that original Big Eight. And that doesn't make sense to me either because I look at Iowa and yes, regionally, they could fit in the Big Eight and they also could fit in the Big Ten, but they have so much history with Wisconsin and with Minnesota and with the teams that exist in the Big Ten that, you want to preserve tradition, you want to preserve rivalries, and of course, you want to preserve regionality because that's also important. So you want to keep some of these teams in their original leagues. And then you start to look at how these leagues have evolved over the years. So Penn State, if you're a fan of Penn State, they were an independent for 100 years before they joined the Big Ten. It was about exactly 100 years, actually, that they were an independent college football team. And they were able to schedule freely. They did schedule a lot of Big Ten teams during that time. But in the 1990s, they joined the Big Ten and they became the 11th member of the conference. And to me, that made sense. They fit the mold of a Big Ten team. Regionally, rivalry wise, you see the rivals with Ohio State and with Michigan State and with Michigan. I feel like those games really mean a lot to the fan bases of all the teams involved. So I look at the Big Ten and I want to keep the original members and I also want to add in Penn State. And I'm at 11 teams now, but I like a round even number. So that's why I moved to 12. And because 12 is my favorite number. So if you have other opinions on that, I totally understand. But I look at the Big Ten and I want to keep the original members. I want to keep Penn State. And I maybe want to put in a team like Notre Dame. I think that they would fit in a lot of different ways, rivalry wise, regionality wise, history wise, putting them in a conference wise. But I love the idea of 12 team conferences, 144 FBS teams, a power six and a group of six, if you will, but really 144 teams. After that, before we even get to the teams in each conference, because that could really be debated in a lot of different ways, I want to talk about what I want the regular season to look like. I love that there are 12 regular season games for obvious reasons, but I think the number has been perfect because it works well not only with the length of how football season should be, but also with the academic calendar for a fall semester because college football cannot happen if it doesn't exist at a college. College football cannot happen if it is existing outside of a time frame that is good for students, good for weather, good for academic calendar. So for me, a 12-game regular season, I love keeping that. I also love keeping 8 conference games. I think if you're talking about 12 teams per league, 8 conference games makes a lot of sense because you could have 4 home and 4 away games instead of a 9-game conference slate where some teams have 5 away games, some teams have 5 home games. I like 8. And some of you may be thinking, okay, if a conference has 12 teams, then are you splitting it north and south, east and west? Are you putting it into divisions? My answer with that is no. And that's because if you look at the Big Ten, for instance, this is a good example, and you split it east-west because it doesn't really make sense to split that conference north-south. But if you split it east-west, you'd be talking about the East Division containing Ohio State, Michigan, Indiana, the last 3 national champions, Penn State, a team that's been in the playoffs, in the semifinals, always up there in contention. You'd be talking about the four best teams in the Big Ten. This is assuming that Notre Dame is not in it, of course. But you'd be talking about four of the best teams in the Big Ten, all in one division. And then the winner playing a division winner of Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Purdue, Northwestern. I don't know about that. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So for me, when I look at conference structure, you have 12 teams in every league. That means that if you're Ohio State, you have 11 possible opponents that you could be playing yearly. And if you want to protect rivalries, like Ohio State, Michigan, if you want to protect the Illabuck, Ohio State versus Illinois, then you would do what's called a 5-3-3 scheduling model. You could also do this a couple different ways, but a 5-3-3 scheduling model allows you to protect five rivals annually. So amongst your 8 conference games, 5 of them are the same teams every year. Then the other 6 teams are rotated every other year. So in a 4-year time span, you're playing everybody in your conference twice. You're playing your biggest 5 rivals 4 times, and you're doing it home and away. So 5-3-3 scheduling model for an 8-game conference slate makes a lot of sense. So you have 5 opponents that'll be protected annually, while the remaining 6 of your opponents in conference will be played every other year. That means you'll see your rivals all the time. You'll have 4 home games and 4 away games every year based on the 8-game conference schedule. You'd get a lot of scheduling variety. Everybody in the conference would be seeing each other. It would just make a lot of sense. So you take away the divisions. You have the top 2 teams in your conference at the end of the year play in a conference championship, but it's a 5-3-3 scheduling model. That way, if let's say you're Oregon and I recreated the Pac-12, you'd be able to protect your rivalries with Oregon State, Washington State, otherwise known as the Northwest Championship, those 4 schools that are in Oregon and Washington, that's the Northwest Championship. But you'd also be able to protect some of those other games like Oregon USC, if you want to protect that on a yearly basis. And then every 4 years, I think you could reevaluate those rivalries. I mean, we're not going to get rid of Alabama Auburn, but you might want to evaluate a rivalry like Alabama Ole Miss. Maybe you're like, okay, we did it every year for 4 years. Let's reevaluate if these are protected rivals going forward. But either way, 8-game conference schedule. So that leaves 4 non-conference games. And I want these to be structured nicely. I want these to be structured in a way where a college football playoff committee, if need be, can go in and evaluate teams properly. I want it to be structured in a way where we're providing meaningful non-conference games. We're protecting rivalries that exist out of conference because there's no way in the world I'd put USC and Notre Dame in the same conference. There's no way. But would I want them playing every year? Yes. Same with Iowa and Iowa State. Same with Florida and Florida State. I'd want those teams playing every single year, but I don't view them as teams that should be in the same conference. Penn State, Pitt. I think that's one that should be a bi-yearly rivalry, one that's played every other year. So your 4 non-conference games would be this. Your first one would be a non-conference group of 6 rivals. So let's say you're Cincinnati. One of the longest rivalries in college football is Cincinnati versus Miami of Ohio. I'd want to protect that game because Cincinnati would be a power conference team and Miami of Ohio would be a group of 6 team. So you'd be protecting that rivalry on a yearly basis. Colorado State. That's another good example. East Carolina and NC State. Now, certainly, you may be saying, okay, Bryan, but a lot of power conference teams, they don't have a group of 5, group of 6 rival, right? And to that, I say this would provide an opportunity for teams like Alabama, for instance. They don't have a group of 6 rival, but Alabama would be able to schedule one of the in-state group of 6 schools during this time. So that could be Jacksonville State, that could be Troy, South Alabama, UAB. It could be someone in the region, Georgia Southern maybe it's Kennesaw State, maybe it's Middle Tennessee. But for teams that don't have a group of 6 rival, which is most of the country, you'd be able to schedule someone in your region that could provide a money-making opportunity for that university, for that program. And it could also be a really good thing for the fan bases. Because I think that there are a lot of Power Six, Group of Six rivalries that need to be maintained, like Cincinnati and Miami of Ohio, like I believe it's Stanford and San Jose State, things like that, that I would love to see continued on. So that's one of your non-conference games. Another non-conference game that you'd be playing every year would be a non-conference Power Six rival. So if you're Notre Dame, that's your USC game. If you're if you are Iowa, that's your Iowa State game. If you are Louisville, that's your Kentucky game. If you're South Carolina, that's your Clemson game, if those two teams were not in the same conference together. But this would provide an opportunity for everybody to play that team that is a rival that's not in their conference every year. Now, some schools, I'm thinking like Penn State is a really good example. Penn State and Pitt is a really fun rivalry, but I think it could exist on a bi-yearly basis. Ohio State and Cincinnati, it's not really a rivalry, but they're the only two power conference schools in the state of Ohio. You could play that game every 4 years. So this would be that slate for you to schedule your non-conference Power Six rival. Or if you're in the group of six, your non-conference group of six rival. Your third non-conference game would be a committee scheduled game. Because as I wrote here, we're living in an era where a human committee is needed to evaluate, let's say, an ACC team against a Big 12 team, despite no common opponents and few metrics to base any reasoning upon. So in a non-conference committee scheduled game, we'd be able to pit every conference against the rest based on the previous season's results. So if you finished, let's say, third in the Big 10 the year prior, you would play the third best team in the Big 12 from the year prior. If you finished fifth in the Pac-12, you'll play the fifth best team in the SEC. These are just examples. This would also provide a good opportunity for group of five, group of six teams to play up in competition. So let's say you won Conference USA a year prior. You're Kennesaw State, and you won Conference USA in 2025. Then in 2026, you take on the seventh best team, let's say, in the Big Ten. This is just an example. And if you're listening on YouTube or Spotify, you can see I put a little example chart out there. It shows that the top six teams in the Big Ten, they'd play a power conference team from another league. The bottom six teams in the Big Ten, they'd play one of the top six teams in a group of six league. Then after that, we get to one free opponent. So to round out the schedule, your last of your four non-conference games, and this game can happen whenever, your athletic department can schedule it. This is where if you want to play an FCS team, if you want to play another group of six team, if you want to play just somebody out of conference that, your athletic departments have a relationship with each other or something, this would be your opportunity to schedule that game. So to reiterate, we have 12 regular season games. 8 of those are conference games. 4 are non-conference games. Of those 4 non-conference games, 1 is a Power Six rival, 1 is a Group of Six rival, 1 is scheduled based on previous season's results, and then 1 is a free opponent. Then we get to the debate of conference championships. There's been a lot of debate about this. A lot of debate about, are they needed? Why are we playing in this game? Is there really any incentive to playing in this game? And I looked at conference championships from this past year. A lot of games had weight that made sense when we're talking about the college football playoff, but a lot of games didn't. So I think about the American Conference this past year, North Texas and Tulane. They were playing basically a de facto CFP game. They were playing for a spot in the college football playoff. So that game made sense. That was a good conference championship game to have. The ACC was Duke versus Virginia. Virginia was playing for a playoff spot. Duke was playing for a playoff spot, but they would have needed James Madison to lose because obviously James Madison won the Sun Belt. Duke won the ACC, and we all know who the playoff committee selected. It was James Madison. The Big Ten one was the one that probably had me the most frustrated. It was number 1 Ohio State versus number 2 Indiana. The only 2 undefeated teams in the country, 12-0 versus 12-0. One of the very few number 1 versus number 2 games of all time. And this one had the least amount of stakes behind it. Of all the number one versus number two college football games that have ever occurred, this one had the least amount of stakes. And that's because the winner became the one seed and the loser was the two seed. That was Ohio State. They were the two seed. Both teams still got into the playoff. Both teams still got a bye in the first round of the playoff. Obviously, Indiana ended up winning a national title. So you could say a Big Ten championship was good momentum. You could certainly say that. But I think that also, when I look at that, I'm kind of like, man, there was not a lot of weight behind this game. So I'm looking to change that. I mentioned some of the other conference championship games in here if you want to go back and read that article. But I will talk about the playoff eventually. Army Navy. That's another one that people get caught up on. I've heard Joel Klatt say that he wants to put the Army Navy game at the beginning of the season. I don't buy into that because I think that both programs are competing all season long for that game at the end of the year. Both teams are in the American Conference right now, but it's not an American Conference game. And that's because it occurs after conference championship weekend. So there is a very real scenario where this could happen, where Army has a really good season. They make the conference championship game. Let's say they beat Tulane. The next, I believe 2 days later, after the American Conference Championship game, is when the CFP committee puts their bracket out, their final bracket. There's a really real scenario here where Army could win the American, 2 days later be selected for the college football playoff, and then a week later have to play in the Army-Navy game and win or lose. I mean, the playoff is already finalized. So the Army-Navy game is in a really weird spot. I like that it's a standalone game. I like that it's at the end of the year. But I don't like that the playoff can be selected before this game occurs. So my proposal is this, and feel free to disagree with me on this. I think that the Army-Navy game should be on Black Friday. I like Thanksgiving weekend being the rivalry weekend. Would love Ole Miss and Mississippi State, the Egg Bowl, to be back on Thanksgiving Day. I love all the games that happen on Friday night, Saturday afternoon, Saturday night. I think it's an awesome weekend of college football. I think it comes at a really good time. I love rivalry weekend. I think we all love rivalry weekend. But I would like Army-Navy to be a standalone spot on Friday afternoon, because people aren't working unless you work, obviously, in retail. It is Black Friday. But people are at home. Families are at home. People are watching TV. People are watching sports. Army-Navy on Black Friday would make a lot of sense. It would also allow it to go back to being, not go back, but it would allow it to be a conference championship game, a conference game. The winner of this game, would have bragging rights. They also potentially could play for the American Conference title. I think that this makes a lot of sense. Putting it on rivalry weekend, but in its own standalone spot. And if you want to block off all of Black Friday for it, I say you could do that too. But I think it should definitely be the afternoon slot. You can still have games at night, but this is the game on Friday. This is the Black Friday game always. That's my proposal for it. I think it would make a lot of sense. Now, I need to take a drink of water. So I know that I said 12 was my favorite number. It will always be my favorite number. It will always have a near and dear spot in my heart. But when I think about the playoff, do I want it to be 24 teams? Do I want it to be 16 teams? Do I want it to reduce down to 8 or 4? Do I not want to play off at all? What I've thought about, and I've thought about this for a while now, I was always an advocate for 12, but now I'm an advocate for 14. And the reason being, I want to preserve conference championships. I think that those are really cool games. I think that if we were to reduce conference sizes to 12 teams per conference, we would have meaningful conference championship games, and the 14-team playoff would be the best model. Here's why. Let's say you have Indiana number 1, Ohio State number 1 and Indiana number 2, like you did this past year. In a 14-team playoff, if you look at the current NFL playoffs, The top two teams, the top team from the AFC and the top team from the NFC, get a bye. In college football, we don't split it into AFC, NFC. We just have all these different conferences. I would want the top two teams to have to be conference champions. So in a 14-team playoff, the number one team gets a bye, the number two team gets a bye. My caveat to this, to prevent a situation like Ohio State and Indiana where they're both undefeated, the winner bumps up to number one and the loser drops down to number two, those top two seeds have to be a conference champion. That means that game would have meant a lot more in Indianapolis this past year because you would have had Indiana and Ohio State playing for the number one overall seed. They'd be playing for a bye. The loser would not get a bye. And then they'd also not get a home game. Because what I want in this new structure, I talked about it, how I want 12 conferences to each have 12 teams each. 144 FBS teams, Power 6, Group of 6, 12 teams per league. I would want 8 conference champions to make the playoff. So that means every Power 6 champion, most years, every Power 6 champion, and then the top 2 Group of 6 champions. And when you look at a 14-team bracket, you would have the top 2 champions, the number 1 ranked conference champion and the number 2 ranked conference champion. They would be the teams that get a bye. That would alleviate the pressure. Let's say if you were to have the number 1 and number 2 or number 2 and number 3 team in the country playing for a conference title, it would put some more weight on it. So it doesn't mean what little it meant this past year with Indiana and Ohio State, where it didn't mean as much. The 6 remaining conference champions, so the top 2 get a bye. The other 6 conference champions that are in that top 8 conference champions, they don't just make the playoff, they also get to host a first-round game on campus. Because then this puts weight on every conference championship game, even if both teams are playoff locks. Because let's say you have the number 6 and number 7 team playing for an SEC title. In a real world and in our structure, both teams are making the playoff, but I want that game to matter. So the winner of that game gets to host a first-round game on campus. The loser still makes the playoff, but they have to go on the road now. So 8 conference champions make our 14-team field. The next 6 teams are all at-large teams, but I want something different out of them this time around. I want them to have to play in a play-in game on conference championship weekend. So we have Thanksgiving, we have all of our rivalry games. The weekend after, same as it is now, is conference championship weekend. So we have 12 leagues, that's 24 teams playing for a conference title. Top 8 champions are getting in automatically. Top 2 champions are getting a bye. Next 6 conference champions are getting to host on campus. And 6 at-large teams are going to come from play-in games. So as conference championship weekend is taking place, we need to be awarding play-in winners with spots in the playoff. So that means that if you didn't make your conference championship game, but you're ranked pretty high, you don't just get to sit at home and get healthy. You have to play. So that means this past year, teams like Oregon, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Miami, Notre Dame, Texas, Vanderbilt, all of those teams would have had to play a play-in game to make the playoff. This would have given Texas a chance. This would have given Notre Dame a chance, Vanderbilt a chance, some teams that were maybe ranked behind them a chance. And then if you're a team like Oregon, you went 11-1 this year. You didn't make the Big Ten championship, though, based on tiebreakers. You would still have to play your way into the playoff. You would be able to host a team like Vanderbilt. So Oregon ranked really high. You would host a lower-ranked play-in team like Vanderbilt. Ole Miss, you would host a team like Texas. Texas A&M, you would host a team like Notre Dame in a rematch, this time at your place. But I want every team that made the playoff to play a game during conference championship weekend. I still want the focus to be winning a conference because that could get you a bye, that could get you hosting a game. I still want that to be the focus. But I think that there should be play-in games for those teams that are sitting at home. I don't think it's fair. So the quarterfinals, I want also hosted on campus because the current format for the college football playoff puts the quarterfinals at historic bowl venues. And it takes away from a lot of the fan experiences that a college town can provide. In a new look CFP, the quarters should be hosted on campus of the higher ranked teams. So many of you are probably questioning my structure and you're saying, okay, wait, so Tulane, since they won the American and they were the, I don't know, fifth highest ranked conference champion, they would get to host on campus a first round game? Yes. Yes, they would get to host. They would get to host a team like Vanderbilt or Texas or whoever wins those play-in games. But I want the conference champions rewarded. So they would get to host on, on campus that first round. However, once we get to the quarterfinals, it's now the highest ranked teams. So you could go, let's say, I'll give a good example of this. Let's say Alabama goes 12-0 during the regular season. They're number one in the country, but then they lose to Georgia in the SEC title game. Georgia would probably get a 1 or 2 seed in this scenario, so they'd get a bye and they'd get to host a quarterfinal game. But Alabama would have to go on the road for the first round. That's because they didn't win their conference. We're rewarding conference champions. But then in the second round, since Alabama probably would still be ranked number 3 or 4, just pure ranking, they would get to host a quarterfinal game if they were to get past the first round. So in the first round, they'd probably have to travel to a group of 6 champion. And if they were to win that game, which they probably would, they would get to host a quarterfinal game on campus. I think it would be great. This happens in the FCS playoffs all the time, where a team starts on the road and then because of certain bracket luck or bracket ideology, they're able to then host a later round game because they're the higher ranked team. This happens all the time. So conference champions host the first round games, but the top ranked teams host the quarterfinal matchups. That could be a conference champion. In many cases, it would be, but sometimes it wouldn't be. Sometimes that would be your 12-0 Alabamas who lose the SEC title. That's what it would be. Then we get to the semifinals. I'd want these games to be at the Rose Bowl and maybe another New Year's Six Bowl site. I hear a lot about, okay, we should have the national championship game on New Year's Day or New Year's Eve or New Year's weekend, whatever it is. I don't love that as much because New Year's weekend is so big for college football. I think that we should at least have 2 games. So I love New Year's weekend, New Year's Eve, if you will, to be 2 semifinal games. So I think that these should be at neutral sites. Although in D3 and D2 and in FCS even, these are at the higher ranked teams. I just don't think that there's as big of a difference between the number 4 and number 1 team or number 2 and number 3 FBS teams. It's usually pretty slim, the difference. So I want the semifinals to be at the Rose Bowl and then another New Year's Six bowl site. The national championship, I want that to be at an indoor neutral site. So this could be stadiums across the country bidding for this. This could be at the Cotton Bowl. It could be at the Fiesta Bowl. I'm fine with all of that. I'm open to a lot of change when it comes to that. But I would love for this to just be a week after New Year's. So we're not waiting that long. We're crowning a champion by January 8th, January 9th, something like that. I would just love for it to come back. I would also love for this game to be on Saturday. Obviously, you're working with the NFL on this one. I think that you need to get some smart people in the room. I think that you need to get some people who know how to lead, know how to delegate, know how to talk to stakeholders, and you need to convince them that, hey, we could have NFL playoff games that day still, or NFL games that day still. I don't know if they're in the regular season then or not, that first weekend in January. It might still be the regular season, actually. You could still have your NFL games during the day, but then culminate it at night with the college football playoff national championship. So that way we're done in early January. Then we can have the transfer portal open after that, get students into their respective new schools if they are to transfer before the spring semester starts. I mean, we would just be giving ourselves a lot more time. So that's my new playoff structure. I want 12 teams in every conference, and I want 12 conferences. I want a 14-team playoff. I want the top two conference champions to get a bye. I want the next six conference champions to host a first round game. And I want six at large spots from teams that had to play a play-in game. And if those play-in games are at the Pop-Tarts Bowl, that's fine. If those play-in games are at home sites of the higher ranked team, that's fine too. That's probably what I would prefer, but that's what I would want. I'd want the quarterfinals to be hosted on campuses at the higher ranked teams. So conference championship or not, I want the quarterfinals to be hosted on campuses. I want the semifinals on New Year's weekend. I want it at the Rose Bowl, and I want it at a New Year's Six Bowl site. And then I want the national championship at an indoor neutral site. So that's my viewpoint on the college football playoff. I've been, thinking about this for a while, and I've wanted to kind of share my structure, share my thoughts, and would love to hear from all of you. So you can hit me up on X. You could hit us up on Instagram. You could hit us up on the comment section of YouTube, Spotify, whatever it may be. I'm open to learning more. I definitely want it to be known that I want to protect rivalries. I want to protect the sanctity of conference affiliation and conference championships and winning your conference, winning your league. And I want to provide rewards for teams that do so with spots in the playoff and with hosting abilities in the playoff. And I also want teams to have the same structure of schedule. I want 8 conference games per team, 4 home and 4 away. I want everybody to have a non-conference Power 6 rival, a non-conference Group of 6 rival or rivals. I want teams to play each other based on their previous season's results. And I want everybody to also be able to schedule a free opponent. So that's kind of my view on college football as we move forward. I think it would be good for the TV networks. I think it would be great for the fan bases, especially and most importantly. But I think people would really buy into this. I think people would really buy into the idea of let's get rid of Oregon at Rutgers and get more of Oregon versus Oregon State while also getting Oregon, if they win the Pac-12, to play Alabama if they win the SEC the following year. That's what I think that we need. I think we could get some really high key matchups with this. So I'm hoping that, maybe some people take on to this and maybe people start to, come together and start to think about more about what's best for the future of the sport. But that's all I got for you today. Again, I'm Bryan Partika. Be sure to follow us on Spotify, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, follow us on X, on Instagram, at College Football Tradition, at CFB Tradition. Thank you very much. See ya.